The room was too bright, too sterile, too suffocating. I could hear the distant murmur of voices outside the hospital door, the rhythmic beeping of machines, the sound of my own breathing, shallow, uneven, barely there. But none of it mattered. Nothing mattered. Because I had lost my baby. I lay still in the hospital bed, my body feeling like a shell, numb and foreign. My arms ached for something I would never hold. My stomach felt hollow, empty in a way that went beyond the physical. I had carried life inside me. A piece of myself, of my love, of everything I had dreamed of. And now there was nothing. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the pain away, but it was useless. No amount of darkness could erase the truth. I had lost because of him. The door creaked open. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Ethan. His footsteps were careful, hesitant. The kind of hesitation that didn't belong to a man who had just lost his child, but to a man who had been caught. I hated him in that moment. Hated the sound of his breath, hated the weight of his presence in this room, hated that I still wanted him to say something, anything, that would make this pain bearable. But I knew better. He sat beside the bed, reaching for my hand. I flinched. His hand froze midair before slowly retreating. A sharp inhale. Emma, don't. The word came out hoarse, fragile, but it carried more power than anything I had ever said to him before. He fell silent. I turned my head, finally looking at him. His ice blue eyes were clouded with something unreadable. Guilt? Regret? Fear? Did it even matter? I studied his face, the sharp angles, the perfect features that once felt like home to me. No. All I saw was the man who had lied. Who had kept secrets. Who had pushed me to the point where my body could no longer hold the one thing that mattered most. I felt the pain creep back into my chest, sharp and suffocating. I curled my fingers into the bedsheet, gripping the fabric to ground myself. I don't want to hear your excuses, I whispered. Ethan exhaled, his jaw tightening. I never meant for this to happen. I laughed, a broken, bitter sound that barely made it past my lips. And yet it did. His gaze flickered downward, his hands balling into fists. Did you ever love me? I cut him off, my voice quieter now, almost hollow. His eyes snapped to mine, something like shock flashing across his face. Emma, of course I did. I do. A lump formed in my throat. Then why did you lie to me? Silence. The same silence that had become our normal. The same silence I had ignored for far too long. I turned my head away, staring at the blank hospital wall. I lost our baby, Ethan. My voice broke on the last word, but I forced myself to keep speaking. And I don't even know if you care. His breath hitched. You know I do. I didn't. Because if he had cared, if he had truly loved me, he never would have made me doubt him. I swallowed the lump in my throat, my body trembling from the effort of holding back my emotions. You should go. His entire body went still. Emma. I need to be alone. I heard the sharp exhale, the way his breath caught for just a second. He wanted to fight, wanted to say something, but what could he say that would undo what had already been done? After a long pause, I heard the scrape of the chair, the soft shuffle of his footsteps. And then the door closed. I was alone. For the first time in years, truly, devastatingly alone. And for the first time in years, I knew I couldn't stay with him. The walls of the hospital room felt like they were closing in. The air was thick, suffocating, pressing down on my chest as if it wanted to crush me completely. I couldn't cry anymore. I had nothing left. Ethan had left, but his presence still lingered, like a shadow I couldn't escape. His words, his excuses, the emptiness in his voice. It all haunted me. I pulled the thin hospital blanket around myself, curling into the smallest shape I could manage, trying to disappear. But I couldn't escape the truth. I had lost my baby. And the man I had built my life around was the reason why. A soft knock on the door pulled me out of my thoughts. My body tensed instinctively, expecting Ethan again. I didn't think I had the strength to see him, to hear another pathetic apology that meant nothing. But it wasn't him. A nurse stepped inside, her expression gentle, pitying. I hated that look. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Her voice was soft, too soft, like she was afraid I would break. I already had. I don't know. My voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. She sat beside the bed, checking the floor, her movements careful. Your body's recovering well, but the doctor wants to keep you for another night. Just to make sure. I nodded, not really hearing her. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered. The nurse hesitated for a moment as if debating whether to say something else. I read your chart. I know this isn't easy. I turned my face away, staring at the blank wall. Easy. There was no word further from what I felt. She reached out, hesitating before squeezing my hand gently. You're not alone, Emma. I almost laughed at the irony of that statement, because I had never felt more alone in my life. She gave me one last reassuring smile before leaving, the door clicking shut softly behind her. I exhaled shakily, staring at the ceiling. I had spent years building my world around Ethan. Loving him, trusting him, believing in him. And it had all been a lie. The weight of that realization was unbearable. My fingers curled into the sheets, my mind racing, replaying every moment, every red flag I had ignored. The late nights. The phone calls. The distance. I had blamed myself so many times, convinced I was overthinking, that I was just being paranoid. But I wasn't. I had been right all along. A fresh wave of pain coursed through me, but it wasn't just grief. It was anger. Ethan had stolen so much from me. My trust, my love, my peace. And now, because of him, I had lost the one thing I could never get back. And the worst part? He thought he could fix it. Like this was something he could smooth over. Another mistake he could apologize away. He didn't get to erase this. He didn't get to keep me. For the first time since I had woken up in this hospital bed, I felt a sense of clarity. A cold, unwavering certainty. I couldn't stay. Not after this. Not after everything. I wiped at my face, sitting up slowly. My body ached, but my mind was sharper than it had been in months. I needed to leave. Not just the hospital. Him. I needed to take back the pieces of myself that I had given to a man who never deserved them. I wasn't ready. I wasn't strong. But I would be. And the first step. Walking away. The house felt different when I stepped inside. It wasn't just the silence. It was the weight of everything that had happened. The walls that had once felt warm and familiar now felt like they were closing in, trapping me inside a place that no longer belonged to me. Ethan was sitting on the couch, his elbows resting on his knees, his fingers laced together as if he had been waiting. I didn't acknowledge him. I moved past him, my body aching with every step, exhaustion pulling at my limbs. The hospital had released me, but I still felt weak, hollow. Emma. His voice was low, hesitant. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I made my way upstairs, pushing open the door to our bedroom. The air was thick with memories, ones that should have been comforting but now felt like a cruel joke. The worst part was the nursery. I had avoided looking at it since coming home, but the door was slightly ajar, just enough for me to see the soft pastel walls, the crib Ethan had built with his own hands. A sob caught in my throat. This was supposed to be our life. A perfect, happy future. A family. A love that was supposed to be unshakable. But all of that had been a lie. I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to step inside. My fingers brushed against the small dresser, the unopened packages of baby clothes, the tiny stuffed bear I had bought the day I found out I was pregnant. My knees buckled. I gripped the edge of the crib, trying to steady myself, but the pain was too much. Ethan was suddenly behind me, his hands hovering near my shoulders, unsure if he should touch me. Emma, please. I turned, my vision blurry with unshed tears. Did you ever think about what this would do to me? My voice was raw, broken. He swallowed hard, his jaw clenching. Don't lie to me. My hands trembled as I wiped at my face. Not again. His eyes darkened. I didn't mean to hurt you. I laughed. It was hollow, bitter. That's the difference between us, Ethan. I would have never done this to you. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. I didn't want this, Emma. I didn't. Then what did you want? I snapped. He flinched. He actually flinched. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I took a step closer, my voice shaking. Because you sure as hell didn't want a family. You didn't want a wife who trusted you. You didn't want me. His fingers curled into fists. You're wrong. Am I? I whispered. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I was nothing but a convenience to you. Someone to come home to while you lived another life. His face paled. And there was confirmation. I felt sick. I had spent years loving this man, believing in him, trusting that we were building something real. But he had been lying to me for so long that I couldn't tell where the truth ended and the lies began. I took a step back, shaking my head. I don't even know who you are. Ethan's breathing was uneven now, his mask of control slipping. Emma, please just. I'm leaving. The words left my lips before I could second-guess them. His entire body tensed. What? I'm leaving. My voice was steadier now. Certain. He took a step forward, panic flashing in his blue eyes. Emma, wait. No, I exhaled shakily, blinking back the tears that threatened to spill. You don't get to beg me to stay. Not after everything. His throat bobbed, his fists clenching at his sides. You're not thinking clearly. I laughed again. For the first time in months I was thinking clearly. I turned away, walking toward the closet. I grabbed a suitcase and threw it onto the bed, ignoring the way Ethan's breathing grew heavier behind me. He didn't believe me. Not yet. But he would. Because this time I wasn't just threatening to leave. I was actually doing it. And there was nothing he could do to stop me. The suitcase wasn't big enough for everything, but that didn't matter. I wasn't taking the life I had built with Ethan. I was taking myself. Clothes, essentials, things I had once thought I'd never leave behind, now reduced to meaningless objects. The past felt like it was peeling away with every item I packed, exposing the raw, broken truth underneath. Ethan stood in the doorway watching. His hands were curled into fists, his sharp blue eyes flicking between me and the suitcase. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice too controlled, too measured. I ignored him. Emma. His voice was sharper now, tinged with desperation. You don't have to do this. I zipped up the suitcase, my hands steady for the first time since coming home. I do. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling through his nose. Where will you even go? I didn't answer. I didn't owe him an explanation. His jaw tightened. You can't just walk away from everything we built. I laughed softly. Not because it was funny, but because of how pathetic he sounded. We didn't build anything, Ethan. You were too busy destroying it. He took a step forward. I never wanted to hurt you. I looked up, finally meeting his gaze. Then why did you? His lips parted slightly, but he had no answer. I shook my head, lifting my suitcase off the bed. You don't even know, do you? His breathing was uneven now, his mask of control slipping. Emma, please. I pushed past him. I felt his fingers graze my wrist, a last-ditch effort to stop me. I wrenched my arm away. The touch that had once made me feel safe now made my skin crawl. I descended the stairs without looking back, each step feeling heavier than the last. The front door was just ahead, so close, so final. Then I saw it. The pile of unopened letters on the entryway table. Bills, subscriptions, forgotten things. But one envelope stood out. A name. A logo. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that name. It was a law firm. I reached for the envelope before I could stop myself, my heart pounding in my ears. Emma. I turned, holding up the letter. What is this? Ethan froze. That was all the confirmation I needed. My hands trembled as I ripped it open. My eyes scanned the first few lines, the words burning into me like a brand. It wasn't about our mortgage. It wasn't about his business. It was about a woman. A settlement. A payout. I sucked in a sharp breath. Oh my God. Ethan stepped forward. Let me explain. I shoved the paper against his chest, my voice shaking with rage. Explain what? That you were paying someone off? That you were keeping another secret? His blue eyes darkened, but this time he didn't try to lie. I wanted to scream. To tear apart every reminder of the life I had wasted on him. Instead, I let out a slow, bitter breath. You really don't love me, do you? His silence was answer enough. I turned away, gripping the suitcase handle so tightly my knuckles ached. I didn't care where I was going anymore. Anywhere was better than here. And as I stepped out of that house into the cold night air, I felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom. The night air was crisp, biting against my skin as I stepped outside. My suitcase rolled behind me, its wheels humming softly against the pavement. Every step I took felt surreal, as if I were moving in slow motion, detached from the reality of what I had just done. I had left. The house that had once been my home now stood behind me, looming and empty. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Ethan didn't follow me. Maybe he thought I would come back. Maybe he thought I just needed time, that I would cool off and return like I always did. But this time was different. This time I wasn't just leaving for the night. I was leaving for good. My fingers fumbled with my phone as I unlocked it, my hands still trembling. I didn't have a plan, didn't have a destination, just a desperate need to get as far away from Ethan as possible. I scrolled through my contacts, hovering over a name I hadn't dialed in too long. Liam. The moment my thumb pressed the call button, I felt the weight of everything hit me all at once. I sucked in a shaky breath, holding it as the phone rang. Once, twice. Then, Emma. His voice was groggy, thick with sleep but warm. Familiar. Safe. My chest tightened. I had spent so long pushing him away, keeping my problems to myself, pretending I was okay. I wasn't. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. Liam, I need somewhere to stay. Pause. Then his voice softened. Where are you? I turned, looking at the empty street, the distant glow of the streetlights stretching into the night. I don't know, I whispered. Another pause. Then without hesitation he said, Tell me what you see, Em. I'll find you. A lump formed in my throat. You don't have to. I'm coming. His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. Just stay there. A breath shuddered through me. Okay. The line went dead, and for the first time in hours, I let my body sink onto a nearby bench, exhaustion pressing down on me like a crushing weight. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if I had the strength to rebuild myself from the wreckage Ethan had left behind. But for the first time in a long time I wasn't alone. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty street where I sat. I lifted my head, my fingers tightening around the handle of my suitcase as the familiar black car slowed to a stop in front of me. The door opened and Liam stepped out. His presence felt like a lifeline, something real in the middle of the chaos I had been drowning in. His chestnut brown hair was a mess, his hoodie slightly wrinkled like he had thrown it on in a rush. But his deep brown eyes held nothing but concern. For me. I swallowed the lump in my throat as he took slow steps toward me, his gaze scanning my face, my posture, the exhaustion that clung to me like a second skin. He didn't ask questions, not yet. Instead he stopped in front of me, his voice gentle. Emma. The way he said my name, soft, steady, safe, nearly broke me. I tried to hold it together. I had spent so long pretending to be strong, to carry everything on my own. But standing here with someone who actually cared, the weight of it all threatened to pull me under. I opened my mouth but no words came out. Liam didn't push. He just stepped closer. And that's when it happened. I collapsed against him. His arms wrapped around me before I could fall completely, his grip warm and solid as he held me against his chest. His scent, woodsy, familiar, like home, surrounded me as my body trembled. The dam broke. I sucked in a sharp breath, the first sob tearing through me so violently that I felt like I might shatter. Liam's arms tightened, one hand cradling the back of my head as he murmured something I couldn't hear over the sound of my own breaking. I don't know how long we stood there. But he never let go. When my sobs finally quieted, when the exhaustion became too much, he pulled back just enough to cup my face. His fingers were warm, calloused from years of working with his hands, but his touch was impossibly gentle. His deep brown eyes searched mine. Tell me where to take you. I blinked up at him, still unsteady. I don't know. Liam's jaw clenched, but not in frustration. He nodded once as if he had already made the decision for me. Then you're coming home with me. I should have protested. I should have told him I'd figure something out. But I didn't. Because for the first time in forever I felt safe. I nodded. Okay. Liam took my suitcase from my shaking hands and guided me to the car, his movements careful as if I might break. Maybe I would. But not tonight. Tonight I had someone who wasn't letting me fall alone. Liam's apartment was nothing like the house I had just left behind. It wasn't massive with high ceilings and cold, empty spaces. It wasn't decorated to impress guests who never truly mattered. It was warm. Lived in. The scent of fresh coffee and something faintly woodsy lingered in the air, a comforting contrast to the sterile emptiness I had been drowning in. The furniture was simple but inviting, blankets casually draped over the couch, a half-finished book left on the coffee table. Felt like a home. Liam set my suitcase down by the door before turning to face me. His gaze flickered over my expression, my posture, as if assessing whether I was about to break again. I wasn't sure myself. Come here, he said softly. I didn't hesitate. He didn't hug me this time, not in the way he had outside when I had completely shattered, but his hands came to rest on my arms, grounding me. His thumbs brushed against my skin in slow, careful strokes, the warmth of his touch sinking deep into the cold that had settled inside me for so long. "Emma," he murmured, his voice steady, patient. "You're safe." I nodded, even though the words felt foreign. I wasn't sure if I remembered how it felt to be safe, to be protected. I had spent so long walking on eggshells, questioning everything, wondering if what I felt was real or just another carefully crafted illusion Ethan had built around me. But this... Liam didn't have to convince me. He had nothing to gain, no manipulation behind his words. He was just here. And he wasn't leaving. "Sit," he said, guiding me toward the couch. I sank into the cushions, exhaustion pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. Liam disappeared into the kitchen, and I heard the quiet clinking of glass, the rush of water. Moments later he returned with a cup of tea, steam curling into the air. He placed it in front of me, then sat beside me, not too close, not too far. For a while we didn't speak. I didn't know what to say. How did I even begin to put this into words? How did I explain the way my world had crumbled, the way I had lost something I could never get back? So I didn't. Instead, I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. Liam waited. He always had. Minutes passed before I finally spoke, my voice barely above a whisper. "I lost my baby." The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. Liam's breath hitched, so subtle I almost missed it. But when I finally turned to look at him, there was no pity in his eyes. No empty apologies, no meaningless reassurances. Just grief. Not for himself. Not for something he had done. For me. For the pain I had carried alone for too long. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough with something he was holding back. The way he said it, like he wasn't just apologizing for my loss, but for every moment I had spent suffering alone, made my chest tighten. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Me too." Silence stretched between us again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was understanding. Liam didn't press. He didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. He just sat there, his presence steady, like he was telling me without words that I didn't have to hold this alone anymore. And for the first time since leaving, I let myself believe it. The first night away from Ethan should have felt unfamiliar, unsettling. I should have been restless, haunted by everything I had left behind. But in Liam's apartment, wrapped in one of his blankets, I finally slept. It wasn't a deep sleep. It wasn't peaceful. But it was real. No pretending. No forced smiles. No weight of lies pressing down on my chest. When I woke up, the sun was creeping through the curtains, casting a soft golden glow across the room. For a moment I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet. And then I remembered. I wasn't in my house. I wasn't in my marriage. I was free. The thought sent a strange, unfamiliar feeling through me. Something like relief, something like fear. I sat up slowly, rubbing my temples before glancing at the clock. Mid-morning. I had slept longer than I expected. The scent of coffee drifted in from the kitchen, warm and inviting. I pushed the blanket off and made my way toward the sound, my steps cautious. Liam was standing by the stove, a spatula in one hand, a mug of coffee in the other. He was barefoot, his chestnut hair still slightly messy from sleep, his gray t-shirt wrinkled in a way that made him look effortlessly at ease. For a moment I just watched him. This man, this person who had dropped everything to find me in the middle of the night, who had let me fall apart without asking for anything in return, was cooking breakfast like it was just another day. Like I belonged here. He must have felt my stare because he turned, his warm brown eyes locking onto mine. "Hey," he said, his voice still thick with sleep. "Morning." I swallowed, suddenly unsure of what to say. "You didn't have to." "I know." He shrugged, flipping the pancakes. "But you didn't eat last night, and I figured you probably won't eat now unless I put food in front of you." I opened my mouth to argue, but the grumble in my stomach betrayed me. Liam smirked. "That's what I thought." I rolled my eyes, but the gesture felt lighter than it had in weeks. I sat down at the small dining table, watching as he moved around the kitchen. The ease in his movements, the quiet comfort in just existing together. It was something I had forgotten was possible. He placed a plate of pancakes in front of me before sliding into the seat across from me, sipping his coffee. I hesitated before picking up my fork. "You really didn't have to do this." He raised an eyebrow. "Are you gonna make me say, 'I know' again?" A small laugh escaped me. Liam froze. Not in a bad way. More like he had heard something unexpected, something rare. His gaze softened, and for a moment we just sat there, staring at each other in the morning light. Then quietly he said, "It's good to hear you laugh again." I swallowed hard, suddenly feeling the sting of tears behind my eyes. I dropped my gaze to my plate, blinking rapidly. "Yeah," I whispered. "It's been a while." He didn't say anything else. But he didn't have to. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't sitting across from someone who made me feel small. I wasn't being watched like I was an inconvenience or a possession or a problem to be solved. I was just here. And for the first time that felt like enough. I thought leaving Ethan would feel like an ending. But sitting in Liam's apartment eating pancakes in comfortable silence, I realized it wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning. One I hadn't planned for, one I wasn't sure I was ready for. But it was mine. The morning passed quietly. Liam didn't push me to talk, didn't ask the questions I wasn't ready to answer. Instead, he let me exist in the space between my old life and whatever came next. I needed that more than I realized. But peace never lasted long when it came to Ethan. The moment my phone buzzed, my stomach twisted. I knew it was him before I even looked at the screen. His name burned against the glass, demanding my attention, a reminder that he still thought he had control over me. Liam must have noticed the shift in my expression. His voice was careful, measured. "Ethan." I nodded, gripping the phone too tightly. I should ignore it. I should block him, erase his number, pretend he didn't exist. But part of me wanted to hear his voice. Not because I missed him. Because I wanted to know what lies he would tell next. I took a slow breath before answering. "What do you want?" Silence. Then a slow, calculated inhale. The voice I knew too well. "Emma." The way he said my name, so soft, so full of practiced regret, made my skin crawl. "You left." I almost laughed. "You noticed." A heavy pause. Then his voice dropped lower. "Come home." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "There is no home, Ethan. You made sure of that." His tone sharpened. "Emma, don't do this. We can fix this. We can." "No." The word came out steadier than I expected. "You don't get to ask me that. Not after everything." His breathing was uneven now. I could hear the frustration, the unraveling of the perfect, controlled image he had always tried to maintain. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. I felt Liam shift beside me, his body tensing. He didn't say anything, but I could feel the unspoken warning in his presence. "None of your business," I said. Ethan's breath hitched, and for the first time, there was something real in his voice. Something like fear. "You're with him, aren't you?" I didn't answer. But the silence was enough. Ethan let out a slow, shaky exhale. Not controlled. Not calculated. "Emma," he said again, quieter this time. "You can't just erase me." Something inside me snapped. I stood, my grip tightening on the phone. "I lost my baby, Ethan." My voice was shaking, but not with weakness, with anger. "And you stood there and lied to me over and over again until there was nothing left of me. Until I was so broken I didn't even see what was happening. Now you think I owe you something." Liam rose from his seat, his movements slow, controlled. He didn't touch me, didn't interfere, but his presence was solid. Like an anchor. Ethan was quiet for too long. Then, "I never meant to hurt you." I let out a bitter laugh. "But you did. And now you have to live with that." His breathing grew uneven. "Emma, please." For a moment I hesitated. Not because I wanted to stay. Not because I wanted him back. But because I knew deep down this was the moment he finally understood. I wasn't his anymore. I inhaled slowly. Then with no hesitation this time I ended the call. And for the first time in my life I felt free. The silence after hanging up was deafening. 4 years Ethan's voice had been a constant in my life. Guiding me, controlling me, manipulating me. I had spent so much time waiting for him to change, for him to be the man I once thought he was. But now there was nothing left to wait for. It was over. I let out a slow breath, placing my phone face down on the table, like I could block out the weight of everything that had just happened. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. From release. Liam was still standing nearby, watching me carefully. He hadn't said a word through the entire phone call, hadn't interfered. He had just been there, steady and unwavering, while I faced the storm I had spent so long running from. I looked up at him, my throat tight. "He knows." Liam nodded. I figured. I swallowed hard, the weight of Ethan's words still lingering in my mind. He sounded, I trailed off, unsure how to explain it. Desperate. Lost. Like he was only just realizing what he had done. Liam studied me for a moment before sitting back down, his brown eyes calm but focused. Does it change anything? I knew what he was asking. Ethan was unraveling. He was hurting. He was finally feeling the consequences of what he had done. But did that mean I was supposed to care? I shook my head. No. Liam nodded, but I didn't miss the way his fingers tightened slightly around his coffee mug. He exhaled, leaning back in his chair. Good. Something in his voice made my chest tighten. I had known Liam for years, long before Ethan, long before my world had fallen apart. He had been my friend, my safe place before I let myself get swept into something I thought was love. Now I wasn't sure what we were. I forced myself to stand, ignoring the knot forming in my stomach. I need some air. Liam didn't stop me. I'll be here. That was the difference between him and Ethan. Ethan had spent years trying to control me. Liam just let me be. I stepped outside onto the small balcony, the cool air hitting my skin. The city lights stretched out before me, a reminder that the world was still moving even when mine had felt like it was falling apart. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. For so long, I had been drowning in Ethan's lies, in the pain of everything he had taken from me. But standing here with the night air wrapping around me, I realized something. I had survived him. And for the first time, I wasn't just trying to escape my past. I was finally ready to build a future without him. The night air was crisp, filling my lungs with something that felt like freedom. 4 years I had been trapped in a marriage built on lies, manipulation, and false promises. Trapped in the belief that if I just loved Ethan enough, if I just tried harder, he would finally choose me. But he never had. And now, standing here staring out at the city lights, I realized I didn't want him to. The sliding door behind me opened quietly, and I knew without looking that it was Liam. He didn't say anything at first, just stepped beside me, leaning against the railing, mirroring my posture. We had always been like this, comfortable in silence. He had always been the one person who never needed words to understand me. How do you feel? He asked finally, his voice low, careful. I thought about it for a moment, then let out a slow exhale. Lighter. He nodded as if he had expected that answer. You should. I turned to him, searching his face. You never told me what you think. His brows furrowed slightly. About what? I swallowed, gripping the railing a little tighter. About me leaving. About all of it. Liam sighed, running a hand through his hair. He was quiet for a moment before speaking. I think you stayed with him longer than you should have. His honesty stung, but I didn't flinch. I had asked for it. But, he continued, his voice softening, I also think you leaving was the bravest thing you've ever done. I looked away, emotions knotting in my throat. I don't feel brave. He let out a small chuckle. That's how you know you are. Silence stretched between us, thick with things we weren't saying. Finally, I whispered, I don't know what comes next. Liam turned to me then, and when I met his gaze, I saw something there. Something unspoken. Something that had been there long before Ethan ever entered my life. His lips parted slightly like he was about to say something, but then he stopped himself. Instead, he reached out, hesitated for just a second, then gently tucked a strand of my hair behind my ear. The touch was so light, so careful, that it sent a shiver down my spine. You don't have to know yet, he said. You just have to keep moving forward. I nodded slowly, my heart pounding. Because for the first time in years I was moving forward. And for the first time I wasn't afraid of what came next. The morning sunlight poured through the window, bathing the apartment in soft golden light. It felt different, warmer, lighter, freer. I sat at the small kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, watching the steam curl into the air. Liam was across from me, flipping through the pages of an old book, his expression relaxed. It was quiet, peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't bracing for another argument, another betrayal, another moment where I felt like I wasn't enough. I was just here. Existing. Breathing. Liam glanced up, his deep brown eyes meeting mine. You're thinking too hard. I smirked, taking a sip of coffee. I don't know how to do anything else. He chuckled, shaking his head. You will. And for the first time I believed that. My phone buzzed against the table, the sound sharp, unwelcome. My chest tightened for a moment. Old habits, old fears. But when I looked at the screen, I didn't feel dread. Ethan's name flashed across it, another call, another attempt to pull me back into his world. I let it ring. Liam watched me waiting, but I didn't need time to decide. I picked up the phone, pressed block and set it back down. No hesitation. Liam's lips curved into a small smile. That's progress. I let out a slow breath, and for the first time I felt it too. I had spent so long trying to fix something that was never meant to be saved. I had given pieces of myself to a man who only took, who only destroyed. But now, I wasn't his anymore. I wasn't defined by what he had done to me. I wasn't the woman waiting to be loved, waiting to be chosen. I was free. And for the first time in years, I was enough just as I was. Liam leaned back in his chair, watching me with that quiet, steady gaze of his. He didn't push, didn't say anything unnecessary. He just stayed. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. Something real. Something I could finally call mine.